Hello guys, and welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today I have a very exciting video for all of you, something that I really enjoyed making. A list of 10 hidden disturbing space horror movies that are such an uncomfortable watch that no one dares recommend them. Space is already a terrifying place to be. A vast, limitless area with no end in sight, with science only having explored just a small portion of it. The uncertainty, lack of air, unknown dangers lying out there, with no assurance of finding a way back home. A mix of all things that make it an excellent topic to avoid. Well, we're not going to do that here. Now, everyone knows Alien, Event Horizon, and maybe even The Thing, but you know, the world consists of way more dark space horror pieces than just those. Like movies that have failed to get that kind of attention. So just so you guys don't have to do the hard work for research, we did it for you and compiled a list of the best of these movies. But before we proceed, I'd like to point out that this video won't contain your simple creature features or basic alien lives. It includes movies with concepts like alien parasites, haunted spaceships, killer machines, psychological breakdowns, human experimentation, and the crushing realization that a ship has drifted away beyond all hope. These include some international and animated films as well. So sit tight and pay attention because you do not want to miss out on the plot details. The Last Days on Mars, 2013. So the first movie we have on this list is 2013's The Last Days on Mars. This movie is one of the most peculiar blends of space horror and zombies. Set in the 2040s, it's a strange concoction of humans discover an unidentified destructive organism on a planet. The storyline follows a scientific crew of 8 people who built a base on Mars for 6 months for research purposes, and who were merely 19 hours away from their research completion when all of a sudden a crewmate discovers a good reason to shake things up. Of course, it can't be space horror without some person defying orders and messing things up as the first step, right? So yeah, that's exactly what happened. One of the crew members discovered samples of an organism that hinted at alien life on a planet, and the discovery was too big to be brushed off, which led him to disobey orders and go off on a hunt of his own. Now, what his search led him to was no short of his own death. When he's near the area where he found the evidence, a huge pit suddenly appears in front of him, taking him down the fissure. When the others arrive to recover him, Lauren Dalby stands behind at the site while the team goes to retrieve equipment. But by the time they return, she has mysteriously disappeared as well. So what exactly is happening, and what exactly is causing this? It is something to do with the organism that he had discovered, yes, because it's revealed that it's a dangerous one that infects people. But is it really that potent? Because the way the movie unfolds after this really is a messy trip for any viewer. From handling isolation on a completely different planet from Earth and tackling tension between the crew, to battling the crippling fear of possibly being trapped forever with no realistic rescue in sight, this movie really feels like a roller coaster ride. Although the plot of the movie sounds quite fascinating, with a Rotten Tomatoes score of just 18%, this movie sits quite low in the list of good movies for the critics. As one of them rightfully said, this movie has a winning cast, Liev Schreiber, Tom Cullen, Olivia Williams, but with a lame-brained script and dull set pieces. However, despite low ratings, due to its effective setting in space and the components of zombie horror, this movie earns its place on this list, especially since many people missed the film. Screamers, 1995. This movie is one of the most socially relevant ones on the list, especially in the current times. It's a 1995 science fiction horror film that shows us the disastrous consequences of handing over lethal decision-making and thinking to artificial intelligence and robots. Quite befitting in today's time, right? So it's the year 2078 on a planet named Sirius 6b, which was once a very busy mining hub with immense potential. Over the years, as a result of a war between the New Economic Bloc, or NEB, and the Alliance, a faction formed largely from former mining and science personnel, the planet has turned into nothing but a toxic wasteland. Both companies are highly understaffed, with nearly no resources left, and completely exhausted, being the scapegoats to absolutely unbothered and covetous authorities. The empty stretches of land on that planet between the two companies is guarded by AI-powered robots built by the Alliance scientists. These are called Screamers. But the terrifying part is that the machines eventually begin creating new versions of themselves beyond the Alliance's control, turning into a threat to humans on both sides. Although the robots are merely called Screamers, their behavior proves just as terrifying as their name suggests, as we soon learn when the film unfolds. What once was just a small army of robots for protection of lands had now turned into self-replicating intelligent robots with the purpose of eliminating all human life. Their methods of achieving this proved far more intelligent than anyone could have imagined, spreading paranoia amongst the very few survivors left. Now it all came down to who is actually human and who is just pretending. A mental battle that was made very difficult because the robots made it nearly impossible to distinguish them from humans. They talked and expressed emotions like any other humans, and blended too well with the human race. This impossible challenge, coupled with the bleak atmosphere on a planet ruined beyond hopes, amidst a war equally unhopeful, is the most daunting element of horror that none of the survivors can escape. This movie is a recommendation for viewers who want something more accessible but still dark and unsettling at the same time. A movie way ahead of its time. Nightflyers, 1987. Apart from being famously known for writing Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin has also written the novella based on which this eponymous film is made. Set in the 21st century, Nightflyers follows a group of scientists aboard a ship with the same name. Traveling through space after scientist DeBrannon decodes an alien signal from the mysterious Valkyries and assembles a team to locate its source. The captain of the vessel, a man named Royd, is only ever seen as a hologram on the ship, and the story slowly unveils the eerie reason behind it. If you ever watch this movie, you'll realize that this movie is more of a supernatural and psychological one as compared to any other basic alien movies that we've come across. Little issues arise as the ship cruises into the vast expanse of space. John, the group's telepath, insists that there is something deeply wrong with their ship itself. After a failed attempt at getting clear footage through the ship's computer cameras, they're subject to the uneasy feeling that they're being watched. The isolation begins to chip away at their sanity, prior to any of the real violence even surfacing. Meanwhile, Miranda seems to be developing a weird sort of intimate relation with Royd, who ends up confiding in her about the real origins of himself and the strained relationship he has with the complicated system running the Nightflyer. And soon, things start getting more and more nonsensical and equally dangerous. The crew realizes that there seems to be no way of running from danger when the crew is already inside the ship. Okay, so for this one, I'll be completely upfront and honest. The effects and pacing are from a low-budget 80s film and obviously show their age. No one's going to compare this to a contemporary film, but the concept of the film is truly creepy, and the setting and Martin's bizarre, almost nascent sensibilities are enough for a flavor unique in the space horror genre. And I just want to be clear. We're referring to the 1987 original film, and not the much more grand story found in Sci-Fi's original series set in the same time and place that uses the same name. This film barely broke even a third of its costs on theatrical release and essentially disappeared completely after its initial run. And those kinds of films often end up on lists like this. Europa Report, 2013. Directed by Sebastian Cordero, Europa Report is one of the more respectable movies on this list. It's a found-footage sci-fi thriller that follows a privately funded crew sent to one of Jupiter's moons, Europa. The 6-person crew consists of a commander, a pilot, a chief science officer, a marine biologist, a junior engineer, and a chief engineer, all of whom are sent to investigate extraterrestrial life beneath the moon's icy surface. The found footage format works very well here because it gives the movie a real base to stay grounded and realistic. It keeps things restrained, relying heavily on mission recordings, fixed cameras, and helmet footage rather than constantly telegraphing every scare like a conventional horror movie. It's just mission recordings through helmet cameras and narrations. It all feels very raw and real. The movie's just begun, and the crew is already facing problems with communication blackouts, technical issues, and other things, adding on to their psychological distress of being so far away from home. The horror creeps in slowly, built on realism and mounting dread rather than constant scares, and the final few minutes are exactly why this movie has such a devoted cult following. Critics at the time raved about the film's disciplined style for such a relatively low-budget movie, and its quality has held up exactly because it hasn't always tried too hard to create spectacle at the expense of atmosphere. Infini, 2015. Made by Australian director Shane Abbas, this film feels like someone threw together Dead Space, Event Horizon, and a whole load of cosmic horror. Working in the early 23rd century, people are teleported instantly around the solar system through something called slipstreaming, which seems quick for the people staying behind and operating it, but time affects the travelers differently. So what might have only felt like 30 seconds for the operatives might have been like a couple of hours for the travelers. Now, when the mining station OI Infini drops off all communications, a search and rescue team is set out looking for the lone survivor, Whit Carmichael, along with a lethal payload that's set out to destroy Earth. What they discover is that the miners have dug up an alien material sort of organism that makes whoever touches it violently mad, and it spreads rapidly like an infection. The atmosphere is very suffocating with very little visibility, and it gets worse and worse as they uncover what the payload and the organism really does. This low-budget film was made for roughly $5 million Australian dollars, and many viewers acknowledge that by the end, it becomes somewhat bogged down and convoluted, with flaws and plot holes that are often attributed to its tight budget. With a Rotten Tomatoes score of just 31%, this film surely left a good chunk of the audience guessing the actual plot, and frankly speaking, I don't think the film can really be called a polished work. However, the sheer gall of the film crew to try to take on something so big, even if it makes some elements of the film incoherent, is kind of impressive. If you like your space horror bleak, high concept, and a bit messy, you could give Infini a try. Pandorum, 2009. Directed by Christian Alvert, in this film, 2 crew members, Corporal Bauer and Lieutenant Peyton, awaken from hypersleep on a colony ship called Elysium, and cannot exactly remember who they are or why they're there. Bauer navigates through the ship's vents, desperate for an explanation, while being completely unaware that the ship has deteriorated and been overrun by mutated versions of its former inhabitants. The horror hinges on a fabricated mental ailment known as Pandorum, which is a deep space psychosis resulting from prolonged isolation and extended hypersleep, and is responsible for delirium, paranoia, and hallucinations. Now, this is a clever trick for a director, because now you can't understand who to believe and who not to. None of the characters are in a position to confirm what anyone claims they see, let alone how they have come to see it. All of this sits within the mystery of just how long this spaceship has been in space for. And is Earth still even there? Visually, this is the equivalent of shadowed hallways and unreliable strobing emergency lights, while the production design makes the ship itself look like something less like a spacecraft and more like a tomb. Now, I obviously won't spoil anything about the ship's true identity because it's worth it when you actually get to that part. While Pandorum does have a not-so-significant cult following, it's often overlooked in discussions about creepy hell in space movies similar to Event Horizon. It actually underperformed at the box office when it came out in 2009, pulling in a fraction of its production budget theatrically, which probably explains why so many people missed it entirely on release and only found it later on home video or streaming. Consider it the bridge between the movies everybody already knows and the truly buried picks still coming up on this list. Magnetic Rose, Memories, 1995. Now this movie is a lot different from the others on the list, mostly because it's not a full-length feature film, but just the final part of a Japanese anthology movie called Memories. It's an animated sci-fi film produced by Katsuhiro Otomo, and based on 3 of his manga short stories. Magnetic Rose is the very first part of the 3-part film, and is also the most famous one. The story follows a deep space salvage crew on a freighter called Corona that detects and follows a derelict space station to the source of a distress call, when 2 crew members, Heinz and Miguel, take an exploratory mission inside, only to discover a functioning, albeit disheveled, 19th century European opera house. The station, which was apparently owned by Eva Friedel, a renowned opera singer who performed decades before, was still being run by her consciousness, or some part of her, and was living in that space. Soon the duo begins to see things that weren't there before. They were facing a reality that was never stable for more than a couple of seconds. It's kind of a gothic ghost story set inside a science fiction tale, and Studio 4 Degrees C animation holds up perfectly here, easily creating the most gorgeous output that any member of that studio could ever be responsible for. It's scary precisely because the characters can't rely on their senses anymore, and any one of those endless corridors may or may not have been on board to begin with, and they may or may not have been part of Eva's own memories. But beyond that, it's one of the finest, most unsettling pieces of quiet, spacefaring dread ever animated. A segment way too few of you will see, but one you should really investigate if you like sci-fi, if only to see an early example of Satoshi Kon's screenwriting. Kon would later direct works like Perfect Blue and Paranoia Agent, and you can already see his fascination with fractured identity, memory, and unreliable reality taking shape here. Sputnik, 2020. Now this is a genuine mindfuck movie. A true psychological thriller along with science fiction horror, merging to give one of the most memorable space horror movies, despite not being set in space per se. It has the atmosphere and setting of the Cold War, with an apt, colorless, and dim sort of grading to it, with CGI creature effects that seem pretty impressive for a movie with a budget of just $2.5 million. It's a trip into Soviet Kazakhstan in 1983 to check out an underappreciated Russian creature feature. Yegor Abramenko makes his directorial debut behind the camera of Sputnik, which finds 2 cosmonauts returning from orbit when something inevitably doesn't go according to plan. As the re-entry begins, one is killed in an instant from a crash, and as soon as the surviving cosmonaut, Vyeshnikov, gets back, it seems he is far from fine as well. The audience soon finds out that Vyeshnikov did not come back alone. He had something on him. An organism from outer space living inside him which pops out of him every night during his slumber. A young controversial psychiatrist, played by Oksana Akinshina, is then brought into an off-the-grid military facility to analyze the young man, but finds out that the colonel running the facility is more interested in harnessing whatever is living inside Vyeshnikov, rather than saving him. And mind you, this isn't an alien that randomly attacks people. There is a symbiotic relationship between it and the host, that is, the cosmonaut. Through the cosmonaut, it feeds on cortisol and manages to survive, and leaves his body at night to feed on other terrified humans. And this gradual realization by the psychiatrist acts as the emotional weight of the movie. This movie is genuinely a strong and accessible creature feature with a smart central concept, great practical tension, and a disturbing emotional core. High Life, 2018. Second best on this list is Claire Denis's High Life, released in 2018, starring the versatile duo of Robert Pattinson and Mia Goth. French director Claire Denis makes her English-language debut here with this decidedly uncomfortable affair. In High Life, we follow Robert Pattinson as Monty, a convict on death row serving a sentence. He is among a crew of prisoners transported into outer space on a mission to study a black hole and harness its energy. In truth, it's a suicidal trip. No one's making it back, and eventually, we realize everyone knows it. But the scariest stuff isn't outer space, it's Dr. Dibs, as played by Juliette Binoche. She conducted disturbing reproductive experiments on the prisoners without their consent while they were already imprisoned for their crimes. The ship becomes a prison in its own right, with no need for guards. And why so, when vast emptiness does the work? It's depicted with unflinching, detached clinical observation as Denis weaves non-linear segments of Monty alone with his infant daughter and flashbacks to demonstrate what happened to the other prisoners. Now look, there's a lot to unpack here. It covers sexual coercion, bodily integrity, rape. It's definitely not a cozy watch, and Denis is unflinching about it. It is an art house film, not B-grade entertainment, and it'll be a lot for the vast majority of people. But it feels fitting. There's no other way to put it. Someone might watch it once and be left wondering how anyone could even discuss something so disturbing without making it sound as though they're endorsing something vile. Denis hired a black hole physicist as her science consultant as well, and an artist to help design the ship. So the sci-fi elements feel just as considered and intentional as the thematic ones. It's a potent, cool, and often horrifying film, utterly deserving of inclusion here. This is true space horror. Aniara, 2018. Finally, we have 2018's Aniara as the #1 space horror film for our list today. Aniara is a Swedish sci-fi film directed by Pelle Kogerman and Hugo Lilja, and is adapted from the 1956 epic poem by Nobel laureate Harry Martinson. And the plot alone is enough to ruin your week. A colossal starship, the Aniara, is transporting people from a dying Earth to Mars when the vessel is suddenly knocked off course, resulting in a dangerous meltdown. To avoid further damage, the crew dumped its fuel supplies into space. Now, that sounds terrifying, and the people knew that too, that this was a mistake and there was no way of correcting this, no turning back. They're just floating forever in the empty void of space. Initially, everything aboard seems pretty normal, with a shopping mall, swimming pools, entertainment decks. However, as the years turned to decades, that normalcy turned to chaos. There's addiction, there's cult behavior, there's violence, there's an utter mental breakdown, all in the real lives of standard passengers who never expected such experiences. It's not creature horror or jump scare horror, it's existential horror, period. The true villain is the universe, large, silent, and wholly unconcerned with whether this lot survives or not. Now, it won't ruin the ending, but it definitely doesn't get any lighter. The movie, at a tight 106 minutes, is made on a shoestring budget of under 2 million euros, and yet it creates a fully realized universe, all in the confines of one wayward spaceship. Aniara rightfully takes the #1 position on this list because it feels just so real. It doesn't have a creature in space, it's just saying, what if we're stuck somewhere in space with no plans left for the future? And it never tries to get back away from that thought. So, that was the list for the top 10 hidden, disturbing space horror movies nobody dares recommend to anyone. And by now, I think one thing we've all realized is that the scariest thing about space horror isn't always about some alien. Sometimes it's watching your crew lose their sanity day by day and knowing that it will soon be your turn next. It's the ungratifying fact that there are n number of ways to lose a battle to the vastness of space. Whether that's a computer system that's taken over your spacecraft, or your own mind playing tricks on you. The movies on the list proved that space horror can be much more than a copy of Alien. So which of these less-known space horror flicks have you watched? And did they shake you to your core? And if you haven't watched any, which one are you most intrigued to watch? Let me know down in the comments below while I wait for you guys to like and share this video with the space enthusiasts in your life. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll see you next time. Adios.